I mean, after watching it, I actually had to remind myself that it was not a documentary, that this was actually actors playing people. So my first question to you is, having met Mark, you nailed Mark.
Well,
Not in the
thank you.
sexual
You're the
sense,
first
clearly.
person I know who's met him,
I mean,
except
you
for Chris
really,
Cuomo. I met he's
well,
met him too. I talked to him.
but he was a man who just oozed confidence and bravado and was so like that was why I always find it so hard to believe that he didn't know what was going on, because he didn't seem to be the type of person that would just take that, you know.
God, if we'd had this conversation like 2 years ago, I would have played it a whole different way.
No, but you actually, I know, I
What
think,
a shame.
no, but what I'm saying is you played him exactly the way I remember him, which is someone who was ended up living a
No,
life
I
he
mean,
never
look,
envisioned.
I'm so interested to hear you say that because I thought I was playing him as somebody who was just, had been undermined by his father all his life and been made to feel inadequate, and that he had been made to feel like he wasn't man enough to run the business, and that there was this kind of, I don't know, like feeling of not being worthy, and that occasionally he would have these kind of fiery outbursts in order to kind of cover that over. And of course, he'd grown up with a silver spoon in his mouth, which uh, had been given to him by Bernie, but Bernie, having come from nothing and built his business on nothing, had real disdain for him because of that. So my impression, and I had nothing to go on.
And that was
All
my
I
question,
had
is like,
was,
how do you build a character that has no public persona?
I mean, I had, I did a lot of reading, but reading is really not the main event for me as an actor. I mean, I read a lot as a person, but not as an actor. I, I, I need to see things visually and to hear rhythms and to have some kind of visceral impression of somebody. And if it's not a real person I'm playing, then I find a video of somebody who I think should be that person, and I study that. And so, because it was a real person, I was just scouring the internet for something that I could go off of. And all that I could come across was this like 20-second video that was like a shaky iPhone video of him fishing. And I wasn't even sure it was him for a long time. I watched it over and over again. Didn't quite say it was him on the YouTube clip or whatever. And I watched it again and again and again, and it started to become clear. Yeah, this is definitely him. And it's one of those things where you watch something once and it seems totally insignificant. Uh, it was just him casting his rod out, looking toward the camera, kind of smiling once or twice, reeling in a fish, holding the fish up to his friends, saying something about his casting not being good enough. And that was about it. And after watching it again and again and again, I started to notice little things about it that I hadn't noticed before. And they all were pointing to the opposite of what you're describing. So it must have been a red herring. This was the only time that he'd shown any insecurity, I guess. But he seemed to me somebody who just really wasn't that comfortable in his own skin, and didn't have that kind of natural leadership or natural swagger or confidence, that was something that was put on. And that, having grown up the first child of Bernie, he idolized Bernie, longed to be like him, longed to be as good as him, longed to do what he did as well as he did, and was never made to feel that way. So again, I wish I'd met you.
No, and I actually only saw him in social settings, which is when you put on your, your suit of armor, so to speak, and you put it out there.
I mean, there's definitely a thing of like people who've grown up in privilege and who, go to certain schools and who are used to that kind of sense of entitlement and the feeling that they're going to, take on a leadership role in the world in some shape or form, that is just is natural to that kind of an upbringing. But I've also met a lot of people who've grown up with privilege and who do not, in their core of cores, really feel like they're the man.
So how do you tackle a story this big? What was your way in? Was it that video?
Well, I wasn't tackling the story this big. Barry was tackling the story this big, and his way of tackling the story this big seemed to me to be to tackle a very small story, which was a family drama, and that he wanted to focus primarily on Bernie's relationship with his wife and with his children, and the effect that both his love and his abuse had on all three of them. So to me, I guess showing the fallout of those relationships in some way is meant to indicate the kind of mass destruction that happened, that rippled out from there. But the movie itself is dealing with intimate relationships.
For you, while playing Mark, what was the scene that stuck with you the most that you filmed, or the moment from the movie?
Well, when I'd first read the script, I felt that there was a missing link. I'd read so much about this downward spiral that he'd gone into after the Ponzi scheme was revealed, and that he had spent so much time, he'd become more and more isolated and more obsessive about the internet and about the stories and the public impression that he was in on the whole thing, and that his brother was, and that was just slowly tearing him apart. And in particular, that he had started to, at a certain point, call Andrew and his lawyer over and over and over again, to the point where they stopped taking his phone calls. And in the days leading up to his suicide, nobody would take his calls. And he'd called them so many times, and sometimes they were angry, ranting calls about what people are saying about them, and other times they were like meek, quiet, apologetic calls, and sometimes they were practical, and sometimes they were, emotional, and they were all eventually left on answering machines. And that to me just seemed like, I don't know, it felt just like it really hurt to think about, and it wasn't there. And Barry is an incredibly efficient director, and he's an old pro, and he knows what he wants. He's incredibly well organized, and the show was really well run, and we would sometimes finish our days early, and
Which you never hear.
has never happened to me once in my career. It's the constant feeling of like ending the day before you've done your best stuff is just something that, you live with. It's a permanent state of being as an actor. And so we're shooting in my apartment, and there was, I think it was like 3 p.m, and we shot all the scenes in my apartment. And it was like, well, what do we do now? And so we were sitting around, and we started talking about like, well, there is this missing link to bring him to the point of feeling that he just didn't want to live anymore, and how can we show that? And we started talking about those calls and everything. And Barry said, why don't I just set up a camera in the kitchen, and why don't you just make up a whole bunch of phone calls, and we've got a couple of hours, and go for it. And so he set this camera up. I think it was just a camera on a tripod or something, and I just started making phone calls. And as I went, it just, there was no cutting really. It just went and went and went, and I got into a kind of altered state of some kind, and just started like, it was one of those rare experiences that you can have as an actor, where you get given a very controlled environment where you can just let rip and just allow, like, whatever happens to happen. And so all those phone calls just started coming out of that, and I knew that he was going to be cutting them up anyway, so I wasn't being careful about it, and I wasn't having to sort of work within any kind of parameters, and it was one of the sort of most freeing parts of the experience of shooting the thing. And then he cut it all together into that sequence towards the end with the blinds. That was another thing. The blinds thing wasn't in there, and so we sort of started going around the apartment finding like little things that I could do that would start to get across that kind of growing hysteria and paranoia, and it was all just on the fly. So from the point of view of like the most kind of the most spontaneous scene that we shot, and spontaneity is the name of the game. Mm-hmm. That was probably it. On the flip side of that, the most controlled scene that we did is another one of my favorites, which was the very first scene that I shot in the movie, which was where the SEC was interrogating me for the first time. And I started explaining about all of Bernie's, all the watchdog organizations that he ran.
And when you started reeling off all his
and
credentials.
It was like this list of like a million different agencies that he had run, and the incredulity that this man could be a fraud. And it was my first day of filming, and so I came to that day, of course, better prepared than I've ever been for anything, because I knew I had to say all these things that I barely understood, and they had to seem just so like I'd said it a million times, and I knew every agency that this guy had been part of. I'd grown up with it, and I've heard him talk about it a million times, and so it had to have that feeling of like being incredibly casual when he was talking about those agencies and about his father's career, and yet. Of course, the subtext of the scene is this like incredulity and rage towards these interrogators that they would think that somehow he should have known. And I just was, your first day of work, you're coming into a set with all these legendary actors and everything, and so you want to make your mark early so that people like sit up and
like,
pay attention.
I'm gonna get this one.
You don't want to come in there and kind of like be a damn squib on the first day, and then like those scenes that I don't know that are in the script suddenly disappear before you get to shoot them. But
and suddenly we're sitting here talking about your one scene in the movie,
But so that was like when I was super prepared for, I knew every line for, and there's something about that kind of preparation that can, free you up as well. So.
And before we get to the rest of your career, and you were having a very big year, and we're only in May, but I do want to ask you, how did you guys set up the family dynamic with, Michelle, who hasn't she hasn't worked in years, and she's fantastic. Obviously, I hear De Niro has a future in Hollywood. I hear he's a promising upstart. But how did you guys kind of build the whole family relationship?
Yeah, Bob's just getting going, isn't he?
I heard some good things about him. Yeah.
Well, Sorry, is somebody having a heart attack out there? We are.
Am I being distracting?
This has happened to me before on stage. I'm telling you.
Seriously?
I was doing the Elephant Man, and I think there were 3 lines.
You and Bradley Cooper caused someone to have a heart attack?
Well, we had gotten through the whole play. Bradley had died. He was lying there like this, on the bed on stage, and I had to make an entrance that I had 3 lines at the end, which was about describing how the Elephant Man had died, which was, talking about like asphyxiation or something. And somebody started being asphyxiated in the in the audience, and lights go up, and they say, stop the show. Is there a doctor in the house? And everything. And I was playing a doctor. I almost raised my hand. And I was like, and so suddenly, like, curtain comes down, or I thought it was a curtain. Of course, it was a scrim. And if there's a scrim and there's light behind the scrim, of course, you can see everything behind there. And so Bradley and I were sitting back there going like, oh my God, I can't believe this guy's like, dying out there. And there's like 2 lines left in the damn play. And everybody was watching us back there, of course. And no, so yeah, but like sirens going. It took like 45 minutes or something.
You didn't have to
And
sit there the whole time.
people sat there and waited, thinking that there was like a whole other act of this play to go. Nobody told them there's 2 lines left. If you want to leave now, you'll be fine. But so they all stayed. And then like the curtain came back. I came out and said, he died of asphyxiation of the esophagus, and and then ended the play. And then the curtain came back down.
Well,
I don't know how we got onto that one. There was some argument out there.
so something up there. But how did you guys set up the family dynamic?
So yeah, the family, that's always a tricky thing to do, but that's really the name of the game as actors. Almost always in any movie that you do, you're trying to create the illusion that you have a long-standing relationship with somebody. I mean, of course, there are other kinds of relationships that are played out in stories where you've only just met or whatever, but, you play families all the time, and you generally don't get to spend a lot of time with other actors before you start filming. Films don't tend to rehearse that much, which I'm grateful for. I don't like rehearsing movies very much. I love rehearsing plays, but it's a different process. I mean, rehearsing a play is a long process where you start out with your first instincts, and then you get all into your head about it and get all confused about your character, and all the great ideas that you started out with are suddenly worthless, and then you kind of come back to rebuilding it through this long rehearsal period, and then even through the run of the show. Movies, it's all about your own private work, your own private time that you spend alone, that you then get to surprise people with only once. And so they're completely different processes as far as I'm concerned. And so I don't like to rehearse movies very much, because it's a kind of, it's nothing. It's like you come and you just give away all your little secrets, and everybody knows how you're going to do it, and then nobody's impressed on the day, and you kind of feel like not that special, and the director's kind of like, yeah, I saw you do that when we were sitting around that table, and as opposed to like coming in and having a secret or having some mystery about you that only you know about, and that you start to kind of parse out to the director, and you start to reveal yourself over the course of your performance. And so that's all to say that you don't get to meet your co-stars for very long before. I had the luxury of spending some time with Bob, who we had been in American Hustle together, but not really met. We'd been on stage together to receive the SAG Ensemble Award for that, which was one of the exciting moments of my career. And I had my arm around him and was I told him that my grandfather knew his dad, because they were both Italian artists of the same era in New York, and they both knew each other. And he kind of like looked at me a little confused and wasn't sure what the hell I was talking about. So that was the first time that we'd met. But then when it came time to doing this movie, I got when I was told that there was interest in me for this part, he wanted to meet with me again, but I was doing The Elephant Man up in London at this point because the Broadway run had finished, and then he was on a family holiday, and I ended up having to go fly. The HBO had set it up for me to go and fly down and meet him on this boat that he was having a family holiday on.
But of course.
And no, I mean, it was like, he had been, a friend of his had said, would you go, why don't you take your family on this thing with me? And so he was there, and I came down, and nobody knew why the hell I was there, and they didn't know who I was. There was like his like wife, his kids, his best friends and everything, and then this guy who was there on an audition, basically, because I was supposed to be, I don't know, sitting down and having lunch with him, and people like kept turning to me and saying, why are you here, and but he ended up very generously, and at lunch he didn't talk about the movie at all, and I wasn't sure what to say. We traded Chris Walken stories because we'd both worked with Chris Walken. He told me about Chris Walken. He went skiing with him once, and he was wearing a floor-length black trench coat skiing. And apparently he skied straight down to this lodge, and then he just kept going. He didn't know how to stop, and he kept going up the other side of the mountain, and then he stopped and then drifted back down backwards, all in a black trench coat. I have a Chris Walken story too, but I won't bore you with it. Anyway, by the end of it, we were like riding jet skis around and jumping off the bow of the boat and whatnot. And so we had like this time before we shot that really did make a difference, actually. It really did. I felt, especially because he's such a hero of mine, and to work with people like that is always scary, and you're a little bit overawed. And so to have spent that time together, I felt grateful for. And then Michelle is just totally easy, one of the nicest, most laid back, sweet, unpretentious people that I've ever worked with. So that was just instant, she was just right there.
Was it hard ignoring her calls on screen?
Her calls?
Her calls.
Her calls.
When she was calling you guys, begging you to pick up the phone?
Oh, I see what you mean. I thought you were talking about, was Michelle Pfeiffer calling me? I'm trying to remember this. I can't remember.
I mean, she calls me all the time.
Does she? Yeah. Is this what she does? She just calls people?
She just calls and leaves like rambling messages.
Oh, those Michelle calls, yeah. Got to avoid those. Let them go to voicemail. Yeah, I mean, those were great scenes, somebody just sort of, that was all true. She didn't, the boys did not, Andrew did, but Mark refused to see his mother from the day the Ponzi scheme happened until, he said, unless you stop visiting Bernie, I will never see you. And he killed himself before she ever saw him.
Yeah, that family they have paid a price for what happened. That is without question. Some of them, some of them for sure. On a happier note, tell me about working. I know you just finished working with Rachel Weisz and Rachel McAdams.
Yeah.
So this is a very awkward segue, but there is no happy segue from the conclusion of the Mark Madoff story. So Tell me about working with them and the movie.
So as it turns out, I only play Jewish people now.
When did that happen?
I guess it started with Mark Madoff. I played a Hasidic rabbi in this movie with Rachel Weisz and Rachel McAdams. I know you don't think it's likely choice, but wait till you see my beard. And then I'm going to play a Mossad agent in this movie with Chris Evans next in South Africa this summer. So I don't know what's going on. I really don't. But I'm so grateful. These have been great roles. I've learned to speak Hebrew.
You really have?
Yes. Moideani lefonecha, melechai vikayom shech chazarto binish musi
I don't know what
bechem
you're
larabo
saying, but it sounds
monasecha.
damn good.
No, this movie was one of the, well, God, you know, it's so, it was one of the most exciting experiences I've had as an actor. I found out about, I don't want to bring the mood down, but I found out about, I got this job, which was an incredible role. I'll give you a little background on the story. It's about 3 people who have grown up together in an Orthodox community in the north of London. And when they were teenagers, the 2 girls had some kind of sexual encounter together. And Rachel Weisz's father was the community rabbi, found out about it and sent her to New York to get her away to study. And she then left the community altogether, became a modern woman, and just completely gave up the orthodoxy. Meanwhile, I became his kind of adopted son and protege, and he was grooming me to take over from him in this community. I also married the other girl, Rachel McAdams, in this 15-year period that Rachel Weisz had just cut off all communication with her father and the community and the 2 of us, who were her closest friends. The movie begins with her father dying. She finds out about it and comes back to the community for the first time in 15 years to discover that I am married to the woman that she was in love with. And she moves into our house to mourn for the period of mourning. And it all is leading up to this hesped, this eulogy that I have to give for her father, who's sort of my father, and to assume this new role as the leader of this community. And in that time, this romance rekindles, and my marriage is turned upside down. And I won't tell you what happens, but so it was an incredible story. It was an incredible director who is a Chilean guy who's had this one film, Gloria, and his new film is called Fantastic Woman, Una Mujer Fantástica, which was a big hit at Berlin, and Sony Classics bought it. And he's just an incredible guy. He's an inspired director, one of the best I've worked with, and one of the few directors I've worked with who I became really close friends with. I found out about this job a week before I found out that my dad had 3 to 6 months to live.
Oh, Jesus.
And I was going to turn the job down. And he, you know, I talked to him about it, and he said that he would be just so depressed if I turned this job down and sat around waiting for him to die. And so I decided to do the job, and they worked out all these sort of ways that I could fly back and visit him and everything. And I went over there feeling the whole time that my dad had, you know, given me this role, kind of like he'd given me this gift of being able to do this role. And so I just, you know, I guess I was just more committed to it than I'd ever been, because I felt like if I didn't treat every day like this was, you know, a great opportunity, that I would somehow be disrespecting him. And maybe that was why, but it was one of the most like immersive and totally committed experiences that I've had as an actor, and I was so grateful to him. And he was very patient about dying and waited for me to come home, and we had 3 great months together.
And I know it's not funny, but you have an awesome sense of humor, and I love your outlook.
Thank you. Thanks.
Let me ask you a few audience questions. At your level and stage of your career, do you still train with an acting coach? And if so, who with, and who would you recommend? Give away all your secrets.
You know, I have to say that I don't work with an acting coach, and the reason is that the few times that I have, they've always undermined my confidence so much that I've just gone in like a cripple into the experience of shooting the movie, and everything they had to say were great ideas, but they weren't mine. I mean, I hadn't come up with it, and so I felt kind of ashamed and embarrassed that I hadn't thought of it or whatever it was that they were suggesting. It's a terrible thing. I mean, like, if there's anything I've learned, like having an ego as an actor is a stupid thing. You know, you should put that aside and not have any kind of, not be proud about your reputation or what you think you deserve, or, you know, the way that you think that people should respond to you, given all the years that you've worked and done this, that, and the other thing. And who cares, you know? And I guess maybe that was sort of probably some part of the sort of feeling of working with a coach, that I just could never kind of, I don't know, cede control over my own characters to somebody else. And so I'm open to it now, I think maybe more than ever, but I haven't done that. My wife worked with a woman in LA named Penny Allen, who died last year. And I know a lot of people have worked with her, and then she was great. And what she would do is she'd call up Emily and just sort of tell her, she would just talk about the script and talk about all the ways that she could be sort of outrageous and wonderful and fabulous in the role. And it would just get her mind going. I did work with a guy named Harold Guskin early on, and I had like a lot. By the way, the beginning of my career was very old-fashioned. I came up through the theater. I was an intern at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center. I went to acting camps every summer of my life. I studied at Oxford with this British American Drama Academy at Yale. I studied I was an undergrad there, but I studied in the drama school with Earl Gister a bit, and so I certainly, it's not like that I didn't take training seriously, and I devoured books by Sanford Meisner and all that kind of thing when I was a kid, and I put huge stock in that. So, but at the moment, it's just kind of all down to me.
And another question is, I feel like you've already answered it. The question is, how did you prepare for the role? Which I think we already talked about. So I'd like to kind of piggyback off that and ask you, when did you feel that you nailed the essence of Mark, that you really got him?
Well, because Mark was not a public figure the way that the others were, I didn't feel the same pressure to do an impersonation of some kind. What I felt was more of a responsibility to the story that was on the page, and to realize that in the best way that I could. And I felt, early on, really after that first day of that interrogation, that, I had some inkling that there's something felt right about that day, a combination of, the sort of force and anger, and also the sort of fear and confusion that he had. There was something about that scene that felt like it had the right balance of that. And so I kind of took that with me through the rest of the shoot. But I didn't feel like, I've played other roles that are, real people. I played Leonard Chess in a movie, who's the great blues music producer who, produced Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley and all these guys. And I did a lot of work trying to get as close to what I felt like he might have sounded like and what his voice might have sounded like and stuff. And I had a lot more recordings of him in the music studios and stuff. And so I think I love doing that, and vocal work is a big thing for me, big thing. Like, first and foremost, really, the voice.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for talking about The Wizard of Lies.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for being here.